See, you do like fantasy. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. So last week I talked about my June TBR, and this week I am going to do a wee wrap up for the books that I read in May. I managed to read all the books on my TBR, although I had to change one out, and I even managed to sneak in a NetGalley read as well. May, I think I lost a little bit of my reading mojo, but you know, I did keep up pace to keep on track with all my reading challenges, but I didn't really feel like I used my reading time particularly effectively. I'm hoping to step that up for June because I have a much bigger TBR, because as I discussed last week, I went a bit crazy on NetGalley and now feel and I'm now feeling the pressure to make sure that I get through all the books that I have received for reviews. But we're looking back at May now, so I'll talk about the books that I read. So first up was Eat Up by Ruby Tandoh. She was a runner-up in the Great British Bake Off, and I remember watching her on that series and I really liked her. She's very cool, she comes across really intelligent. What I hadn't known is that she has gone on to do a lot of food writing since being on the Bake Off, and I heard this book being discussed on a podcast last year and really wanted to read it. I can't remember what podcast it was, but I remember them saying that this book goes beyond food. She's really talking about the part that food plays in our lives, and now I've read the book, I totally agree with that summary. I myself have struggled for pretty much my whole life with disordered eating, issues with my weight and things, and Ruby can really relate to that and really considers a lot of the dichotomies that we feel around food, but overall she really makes an argument for food being, you know, the angel rather than the devil on our shoulder. Food is not the enemy. This book covers so many topics and ties them back to food, things like family, religion, gender, class, emotions, which sounds like possibly that it might be too broad, that it might be overreaching, but it doesn't feel like that when you're reading it. This book feels you know, quite cozy, and a lot of the things that Ruby says, I kind of felt them as like a hug. She's a really talented writer, and like a lot of foodies, she does get a bit flowery about food in her writing. She can romanticize it a bit, but the food that she romanticizes is the sort of food that regular Joes like us can actually relate to. She talks a lot about, you know, tinned beans, tins of chopped tomatoes, and so it's not the ingredients that she shows her love of food through as such, it's the way that she uses them, and the recipes that are in this book are really the perfect accompaniment to that kind of cozy, joyous vibe that comes through. Next up was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Now, I put off reading this book for so long. I think I was too busy holding on to my claim that I don't like fantasy that I nearly missed this one, and I'm so glad that I actually read it, because this book is a wonder. Because, you know, this is pure fantasy. What can be more fantastical than a circus that just appears overnight? The circus itself is a monochrome arena for a contest played out by two magicians at the behest of their kind of shady puppet masters. And although this is a book that's completely about magic, but I think the real magician here is Morgenstern, because even for a skeptic like me, nothing in this book felt as if it couldn't be completely real. Maybe I had a spell cast on me. I genuinely felt that everything that was in this book could have happened, and maybe part of that spell allows me to overlook some of the things about the book that I normally wouldn't. Like, none of the characters are particularly deep. I didn't feel that romance was as passionate as the high stakes would require, but actually I don't think that matters, because, you know, this isn't a character study, it isn't a love story, it's a celebration of the beauty of magic, the power of illusion, the joy of something without purpose, for its existence to be just purely enjoyment. So what starts off as a battle between these two kind of egotastic old sorcerers becomes not about them, not about the contest, but about something so much more, that it has to endure. and I absolutely loved this book. And at the same time as I was reading The Night Circus, I also read The Gracekeepers by Kirsty Logan, and it was almost as if these two books were ganging up on me to go, see, you do like fantasy, because again, this was another really special read. I went into this book expecting Scottish folk tales, maybe sort of a fairy tale retelling kind of vibe, and I didn't get that, but instead I got something that I didn't even know that I wanted, and I loved so much more. This is set in a world that has become so flooded that people identify not as being from a particular country or of a particular religion or race, but whether they live on land or in the water. And there is a magical floating circus that's full of gender bending acts, and a girl with a bear, and it's all run by this ringmaster who has a really deep heart but who has a misplaced trust in his incredibly arrogant wife. There's also a banished woman who makes her living as a gracekeeper, putting the bodies of sea dwellers to rest and tending for their watery graveyards. North is our girl the bear, and Kalief is our gracekeeper, and they are kind of trapped between the worlds of land and sea and brought together through the mysteries of the water. The world building in this book is incredible. Logan's writing has a really kind of clean beauty to it, and I was totally mesmerised. And I think, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I think I would have been completely broken by the ending if it wasn't filled with such hope. I know there is a follow-up book to this one, and I would really like to read it, possibly snuggled up to North's big bear as my coracle rocked gently in the water. I was totally absorbed in this world, and I thought this book was really, really beautiful. The next book I read was by another Scottish author. This was Scabby Queen by Kirsten Innes. I have already talked about this book in my stay-at-home tag video, so I won't labour it too much, but I have to talk about it again because I really, really loved it. So this is the story of Cleo Campbell, who is a folk singer. She's kind of a one-hit wonder. She's a political activist, and after her 50th birthday she dies by suicide, and this book is told in memories and snippets of the stories of people who knew her, whether they loved her, whether they hated her, and it goes right from her childhood as the daughter of two separated parents. Her mother is very much part of a coal mining town which is struck by Thatcherite politics in the 80s. Her father is a folk singer. He's a bit of a dreamer, a drifter, and you can see how these two elements shape Cleo into who she becomes. There's another story woven through this that Cleo is involved in, which is the story of a group of squatters in London who later in life become embroiled in a court case with the police, and how Cleo plays a part in that and what the impact of that is on the other members of the group. Cleo isn't necessarily a likeable character. She's messy, but I loved how as the story unfolded you saw what drove her to be the sort of person she was, and you kind of felt a bit of compassion for her. I really enjoyed the story of her godfather Donald, as well as the storyline of the squatters. I thought this book was quite fun. It has loads of cultural references, seeing as it spans her 50-year life. It covers everything from like Thatcherite Britain to the poll tax, the anti-Iraq war protests, Brexit, and then there's loads of musical references made as well. I just think this is a really, really great book. It's so interesting and definitely one for people to look out for. Next up was Daughters of the Lake by Wendy Webb, and again I talked about this in my stay-at-home tag video, so I'll just really briefly mention it here. This is the story of a woman, Kate, who's gone home to live with her parents on the banks of Lake Superior after finding out that her husband has had an affair, and while she's there a body of a woman washes up on the shore clutching a newborn baby, and Kate knows this woman but only from her dreams, and it transpires that this woman actually died over 100 years ago, and it's really a story about, you know, who is this woman, who is she to Kate, and why does she keep appearing in Kate's dreams. And the mystery unfurls as Kate keeps dreaming to an ending which I guessed quite early on, but it was quite satisfying to see it play out. But there are a lot of things with this book that I was not a huge fan of. It's considering the things that it does discuss, like infidelity, murder, you know, it's really fluffy. The romance in it is so cheesy, and I really struggled with the relationship between Kate and her gay male cousin, because it was so forced to try and make it feel like there was a connection there. And there's lots of things that it just felt weird, like he was putting her in the bath, they were cuddling up in bed together and things like that, and it just felt too try hard to make it realistic, that it had the complete opposite effect. So yeah, just, you know, it was a fun read. It's not really my sort of thing. So next up was supposed to be Zoe Heller's Everything You Know, but it turns out I've unhauled it and just haven't updated my Goodreads bookshelf, so I couldn't read it. I couldn't find a copy from my libraries online or anything, so I swapped that book out. It was for a prompt from the Around the Year challenge from over on Goodreads around, was he an astronomer called Maximus Hell? Or, no, I've just made that name up completely. I'll write it on the screen for anyone who's interested. But it was a really difficult prompt to fill, and so I kind of went down the route of his surname being Hell and looking at what my idea, what many people's idea of hell would be, and I read Night by, I think it's Elie Wiesel. I think that's how you pronounce it. So this is the memoir of a Holocaust survivor. He was from Transylvania, and when he was a teenager, quite a young teenager I think, him and his family were taken to Auschwitz. So I mean, how do I put into words how important this book is? I mean, especially in our current climate with the rise of fascism and all the horrific racism that we see, particularly obviously in America right now, but what's going on at the moment has really brought to light for people the racism that we have in the UK as well. And I think this book, probably more now than ever, is such an important book. I had to keep putting it down when I was reading to kind of take a breath and remind myself, like, this isn't fiction. He went through this. So many people went through this, and it's so horrific. And I'm not a stranger to World War II fiction and non-fiction. As a young teenager, I read Anne Frank's diary. I also read the memoir of her, well, who would have been her stepsister had Anne survived. It's called Ava's Story, where she talks about the experience of existing in a concentration camp. I think she was also in Auschwitz, actually. But for me, I think this is the definitive story. I've always remembered Ava's story, but I think Night is just, it takes it into another level, because like in Ava's story, he does recount his experiences within the concentration camp, sometimes to, you know, gut-wrenching detail. But he also makes some really powerful statements about those who oppress, and, you know, the human nature of those who survive the unsurvivable. We cannot forget what happened in the name of supremacy, what these people went through. These stories need to be told and told and told. What he and so many other people went through is beyond our comprehension, but we can't afford to be complacent. We can't get comfortable, you know, just sitting, watching Netflix, thinking that voting is something that we just have to do. We have the power to prevent this happening again and stopping it where it still is happening. We have to speak out about any isms, any form of oppression, because the alternative of lived experiences like Wiesel's it's too horrific. And I want to use this chance to draw attention to what you can do to support particularly the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment. I will link some resources in my description, particularly ones that if you don't have money to donate and you feel like there's nothing that you can contribute, that you can actually still take part in. We should consider ourselves blessed that someone like Wiesel, with his amazing voice, was able to survive what he went through and share that experience with us. We can't afford to forget. We can't afford to allow other forms of oppression to continue to build, and so please do something. I feel I should have left Night to the end because it feels a bit flippant now to talk about anything else. But my final book that I read in May was a NetGalley of Scenes of a Graphic Nature by Caroline O'Donoghue. I absolutely adored this book. Since finishing film school, Charlie's life has floundered a little bit. Her father is really ill with cancer and she's kind of put her life on hold to be there for him, to care for him alongside her mum, who she doesn't have a great relationship with. She's working in a local cafe and supplementing that income with making softcore porn in her bedroom. Her only cinematic achievement has been a film that she made with her best friend Laura, telling the story of her dad's childhood, where he was the sole survivor in a schoolhouse tragedy which claimed the lives of his classmates and teacher on a really rural Irish island. Meanwhile, Laura has moved out of their bedsits to start a kind of smug, nearly married life with her boyfriend. Her own career has taken off in television and Laura has been kind of left in the dust. But Charlie and Laura find themselves on the island of Charlie's father's childhood. Their friendship is put to the test and the things that Charlie has been told by her father all her life are thrown into question. I loved the mystery surrounding the schoolhouse tragedy and the kind of shady community of the island, as they are obviously holding back some secrets. But more than a mystery, I think this is a book about belonging. Similarly to Charlie, I grew up with parents of a different nationality. My parents were Scottish and I spent most of my childhood in England, so I could totally identify with that kind of disconnect. Being of a place but not feeling part of it, and being part of another place but not really feeling like you belong to it. This book really looks at what does shape our sense of self and our sense of place. The narratives we tell ourselves, are they the real truth, or are they ones that we create to tether ourselves to a certain identity? Charlie's voice is really strong, but not at the expense of any of the other characters. I really liked the fictional island of Clippin and that kind of feeling of trying to permeate the tough membrane of a small community. It really drives the book forward. As things become unravelled and other things slide into place, I was totally gripped. And I think this is definitely one of my favourite books of 2020. I really, really enjoyed it. So there we have it. That's the books that I read in May. Drop me a wee comment below if you've read any of those, what your thoughts on them were. Are you interested in picking up any of the ones that I've mentioned? What did you read in May? And given that my June TBR is almost double the size of my May one, what do you think my chances are of actually getting through it? Thank you for joining me, and please do check out those resources that I've linked in the description for those who are fighting for justice and equality, particularly in America. If you don't have it, you don't need to spend money, you just need to take a little bit of time to show your support, because Black Lives Matter. And until next time.